The studio lights were bright, almost blinding. Keanu Reeves sat on the hard chair, his back straight, his hands calm in his lap. He had done countless interviews before, but something about tonight felt different. There was a cold edge in the air, and he could sense it in the way the news anchor, a man named Darren Cole, kept looking at his notes like he was hiding something sharp inside his sleeves. The audience was quiet. The cameras rolled, the red on air light blinked, and in that moment, Keanu felt a tiny knot in his stomach. He was used to people twisting his words, but tonight, he had no idea that this man was ready to humiliate him in front of millions. Darren leaned forward, his smile wide but empty. "So Keanu," he said, his voice smooth like oil, "you've made a career playing these heroic characters, but when people look deeper, they say you're not really like them, aren't you? They say you're boring, you don't party, you don't fight back, you don't even stand up for yourself." A low murmur rose from the crew behind the cameras. Keanu's eyes did not blink. He tilted his head, just a little, trying to read the man's true intention. Darren continued before he could answer. "I mean, just last week, you were seen sitting alone on a park bench, eating a sandwich by yourself. Don't you think that's a bit sad? You're one of the biggest stars in the world, yet there you are, alone like you have no friends." Keanu felt the knot in his stomach loosen. He could feel old memories rising. Times when people called him empty, times when they called him fake, times when they whispered behind his back. But he stayed silent. He looked at Darren's eyes, searching for the reason behind this cheap shot. The audience shifted in their seats. They waited for Keanu to defend himself, but he didn't. Instead, he took a slow breath. He let the silence stretch, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried something that made the hairs on everyone's arms stand up. "Sometimes," Keanu said, "being alone doesn't mean you're lonely. It means you choose to listen to the world without noise." Darren chuckled, but the sound was hollow. He leaned in closer, pressing harder. "Come on, Keanu. People want the truth. They say you give all this money to strangers. You take the subway. You live in a simple house. Are you pretending to be humble because it sells your movies? Isn't this just another act?" The question fell like a stone in the room. The cameramen looked at each other. The floor manager shifted uncomfortably. They all knew Darren had crossed a line, but no one moved to stop him. Keanu's eyes dropped to his hands. He rubbed his thumb over a small scar on his knuckle. He thought of the old woman on the bus he once helped, the homeless man he shared his meal with, the stunt crew he gave half his salary to. None of those moments were ever for show. None were ever meant to be headlines. He looked up again. There was a shine in his eyes now, like a distant star about to break through heavy clouds. "If kindness makes people think I'm fake," Keanu said slowly, "then maybe we've all forgotten what real looks like." The room went silent. Darren opened his mouth to speak again, but this time, his tongue felt heavy. There was something about the way Keanu's words settled in the air. They were simple, but they carried an old truth people didn't want to hear. Keanu turned slightly, looking into the camera, as if speaking directly to everyone sitting in their living rooms, staring at their screens. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It just wrapped itself around every listener's heart. "It's easy to laugh at someone who sits alone," he said. "It's harder to ask why he chooses peace over noise. It's easy to call kindness an act. It's harder to live it when no one is watching." A single clap came from the back. Then another. The crew who knew him, the lighting guy who once told Keanu about his sick daughter, the makeup lady whose rent Keanu paid when she was about to be evicted. They started clapping because they knew what the world did in single quotes. Darren tried to regain control. He forced a grin, trying to spin it back. "Well, that's one way to look at it. But come on, don't you ever wish you could just be like every other celebrity? Big house, fancy parties, private jets." Keanu laughed, and for the first time, it wasn't forced. It was the soft, genuine laugh that people rarely heard in public. "I do have a big house," he said, nodding. "It's called my heart, and I invite people in when they have nowhere else to go." Someone in the audience gasped. The cameramen were locked in, zooming tight on Keanu's eyes. They glowed with something no spotlight could create, a quiet strength that could not be mocked. Darren sat back, shifting in his chair. He had come here tonight to break Keanu down, to get a headline that would go viral for all the wrong reasons. But now he could feel the story slipping through his fingers, and Keanu, who had spent a lifetime being misunderstood, was just getting started. When the cameras cut to commercial, the studio stayed quiet. The crew didn't move. Darren pretended to look at his notes, but his hands were trembling. Keanu reached for a glass of water, his fingers steady as stone. He took a sip, placed the glass down, and waited for the red light to blink again. He had more to say, not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been called boring, too quiet, too kind. For every person who sat alone on a park bench and wondered if they mattered. Tonight, he would speak for them, and when he did, no one would ever see him the same way again. When they came back from commercial break, the studio was a different place. The tension was thick, like the air before a storm. Darren forced a bright smile that didn't reach his eyes. He cleared his throat, tapping his pen against the table, trying to regain control of the interview. Keanu sat perfectly still, shoulders relaxed, his eyes calm but sharper now. He knew Darren would not back down easily. People like Darren needed a reaction to stay relevant, and tonight he had decided Keanu was his target. "Welcome back," Darren said, his voice louder than before. "We're here with Keanu Reeves, who seems to think sitting alone on a park bench is something we should all celebrate." A few fake chuckles came from the audience, but it felt forced. Keanu didn't even flinch. Instead, he leaned forward, just a little, his eyes meeting Darren's without fear. "Darren," Keanu said softly, "why does it upset you so much that I choose to be simple?" Darren's smile faltered. He shifted in his seat. "It doesn't upset me. I'm just saying it's unusual. People look up to you. They want the fantasy, the big life, the fairy tale." Keanu let out a small breath. "The fairy tale," he repeated, almost to himself. Then he looked into the camera again. "People think the fairy tale is the fame, the money, the noise. But they forget the fairy tale is really about how you treat others when no one is watching." The crew behind the cameras stood a little straighter. The audience leaned in. Even the floor manager's eyes softened. Darren pushed on, voice sharper now. "You keep saying these pretty things, Keanu, but you've made millions from Hollywood. Do you really expect us to believe you don't care about the money?" Keanu's jaw tightened just a bit. He hated talking about money. He knew how it twisted people's hearts. But this time, he had nothing to hide. "I make money because I work," he said plainly. "But I don't let money decide who I am. Money should be used, not worshipped." Darren rolled his eyes dramatically. "Easy for you to say when you have more than enough." Keanu's mind drifted for a moment to the people he'd met over the years, the stunt guys who risked their lives for him, the set workers who slept in their cars between shifts, the single moms who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. He thought of the countless times he'd given away what he could, not because it looked good in the press, but because it felt right in his bones. "When I was young," Keanu said, "I didn't have much. I remember buying bread and milk with coins I found under my couch cushions. I remember nights when I slept in my car. The money came later, but the person I was before, he's still here." The audience fell quiet. There was no laughter now, only a heavy silence that made Darren shift again. "Sure," Darren said, voice rising. "But people say you do this for publicity. They say you want to be seen as the nice guy because it sells tickets." Keanu's lips curved into a tired smile. "And what do you think, Darren?" The question caught him off guard. Darren's eyes darted left and right. He wasn't used to being asked what he truly thought. The moment felt too raw, too real. He looked down at his notes, pretending to find another question, but his hands trembled slightly. Someone in the audience coughed. A few whispers floated through the air like little ghosts. Keanu continued, his voice steady, his words landing like stones skipping across a quiet pond. "You see, when you do something kind, people will always doubt you. They'll say you want something in return. They'll say it's fake. But I don't live for what they say. I live for what I feel." When I look in the mirror, there was something different about him now. The man who played heroes on screen looked more heroic than ever sitting under the bright lights. His truth shining through the cracks. Darren tried to widen. Darren tried to pivot. "Let's talk about your latest movie," he said, desperate to change the tone. "Do you think your humble image helps sell it?" Keanu leaned back, his eyes never leaving Darren's. "Movies are stories. They're meant to make us feel less alone. If my life reminds people that kindness is still real, then maybe the story off-screen matters just as much." A young woman in the audience wiped a tear from her cheek. She didn't know Keanu personally, but tonight she felt like he was speaking for her, for everyone who'd ever been called weak for being gentle, for everyone who chose kindness and got laughed at for it. The studio was so quiet now that you could hear the faint hum of the cameras. Darren sat frozen, realizing he'd lost the battle he thought he'd win. Keanu looked at him one last time. "People think strength is loud. They think it's how hard you hit back. But real strength," he said, placing a hand gently over his chest, "is how softly you can hold a heart when the world tries to break it." The floor manager gave the signal. 1 minute left before another break. Darren tried to smile again, but the edges of his mouth wouldn't listen to him. The audience erupted in soft claps that grew louder, filling the studio with an energy no spotlight could create. The cameraman felt it. The makeup lady behind the curtain felt it. The millions watching at home felt it too. And somewhere, deep inside Darren's chest, a small crack formed, a crack that made him wonder if maybe he'd been looking for strength in all the wrong places. As the lights dimmed for the break, Keanu sat still, heart calm, knowing he had only just begun to tell the world who he really was. When the show returned from the break, a strange hush lingered in the air. It was like the whole room had shifted. The audience looked at Keanu differently. Now, they didn't just see an actor. They saw a man who had been carrying quiet truths that no one had dared to say out loud on live TV. Darren tapped his pen on the desk, his forehead shining with sweat under the bright studio lights. He knew he had lost control of the interview, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. He leaned in, voice dripping with fake charm. "All right, Keanu, let's get real. You talk about kindness, about living simply, but what about your mistakes? People say you avoid talking about your failures. Is that because you're afraid it'll ruin your perfect image?" Keanu took a deep breath. He glanced at the camera, then back at Darren. He could feel the old scars inside him, the heartbreaks, the losses, the nights when he felt so small that he wondered if he would ever stand up again. He nodded slowly. "You're right. I have made mistakes, many. I have hurt people without meaning to. I have failed friends. I have lost people I loved. I have been broken. And that's why I try to be kind, not because I'm perfect, but because I know what it feels like to be on the other side." The audience fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. Darren opened his mouth, but no words came out. He had expected excuses or denial, but instead Keanu's honesty hit him like a wave. Keanu looked straight into the camera, speaking to every soul watching. "We live in a world where people think they must hide their flaws to be loved. But I believe our cracks are where the light comes in." A middle-aged man in the back row nodded, eyes glassy. He had come to the taping out of curiosity, but now he felt as if this was a confession meant for him too. He thought of the mistakes he had buried deep in his own heart, the ones he was too ashamed to speak about. Darren shifted in his chair, trying to find something sharp to throw back. "So you're saying you're some sort of saint now? That you've never done anything you regret?" Keanu tilted his head, his voice softer now. "I have regrets. I wish I could go back and say sorry to people I hurt. I wish I could hold the hands of those who left too soon. But life doesn't work like that. We can't change the past. We can only decide what kind of person we want to be today." The words sank into the room like heavy rain soaking dry ground. The studio audience was no longer just watching an interview. They were witnessing a man lay down his armor and speak from the rawest parts of his soul. Suddenly, from the corner of the set, a young intern dropped her clipboard. The sharp sound broke the silence. She bent to pick it up, cheeks red. When she stood up, she met Keanu's eyes for just a moment. She mouthed the words, "Thank you." Keanu gave her the smallest nod, and that alone made her eyes shine with tears. She didn't expect. Darren cleared his throat. His voice wavered as he pushed forward. But don't you think people take advantage of you? You give so much. Aren't you afraid they're using you? Keanu looked down at his hands, tracing the lines on his palm. Maybe some people do. Maybe some people smile to my face and take what they can. But that's not my burden to carry. I can't control what people do with my kindness. I can only control whether I keep giving it. His words were so gentle, yet they hit harder than any insult could. The audience began to clap again. But this time, it wasn't just applause. It was a quiet promise that they understood, that they saw him. Darren felt something crack deeper inside him. He wasn't ready to admit it, but he remembered times when he too had chosen cruelty over compassion just to look powerful. He wondered if he'd been wrong all along. Keanu turned to face him fully now. "Darren," he said, voice almost a whisper, "why does kindness scare you so much?" Darren opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted away. For a moment, the nation saw a glimpse of the man behind the harsh questions, a man who once believed that strength meant crushing others. The floor manager flashed the wrap it up sign, but the moment was bigger than the show now. Keanu leaned back, hands folded calmly. "I'm not here to change your mind," he said. "I'm just here to remind people that it's okay to be soft in a world that tells you to be hard. It's okay to stand alone on a bench with a sandwich if that's what peace feels like." The camera zoomed in on his face, catching the small smile that held both pain and hope. Somewhere in the back, the young intern wiped her eyes again. The man in the back row pressed his hand over his heart as the host scrambled to close the segment. Darren sat frozen, his mind buzzing with a truth he couldn't ignore anymore. Keanu had come tonight to talk about his movie, but instead he had given the world something they didn't know they needed, a reminder that kindness is not weakness, and that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. And as the final applause rose, Keanu knew the story was far from over. The cameras went dark as the segment ended, but the silence that settled in the studio was louder than any applause. Darren shifted in his chair, staring at the desk, his cue cards now just useless paper. He had planned to make Keanu look like a fool tonight. Instead, he felt like the spotlight had turned on him, exposing cracks he had spent years trying to hide. Keanu stood up to stretch his back, his eyes kind, no hint of triumph in them. He didn't look like a man who had just won a fight. He looked like someone who had simply told the truth. The audience didn't rush to leave. Some people came down to the front row, wanting to shake his hand, but they hesitated. His calm presence made them feel both seen and shy at the same time. As the crew packed up lights and cables, Darren stayed frozen. He was staring at the floor, replaying every word Keanu had said. It wasn't just about him trying to embarrass Keanu. It was about what he had become, a man who needed to tear others down just to feel big. Finally, the producer leaned over and whispered, "Ask him for a follow-up. The network will want more. The audience is blowing up online." Darren looked up, eyes wide. "You want me to bring him back out?" The producer nodded. "This isn't just an interview anymore. This is something people will remember for years." Darren swallowed hard. His pride screamed at him to say no, but something inside him, something small and honest, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he needed to hear more too. He turned and saw Keanu talking to the young intern who had dropped her clipboard. She was telling him about her mother working double shifts, and how his movies gave her a reason to smile when the world felt cruel. Keanu listened like she was the only person on earth. He didn't rush her. He didn't glance at his watch. He just stood there, eyes warm, nodding with that quiet strength. Darren walked over, each step heavier than the last. His hands shook slightly as he cleared his throat. "Keanu," he said, voice lower now, would you stay? People want more." Keanu turned, looking at him with that same calm gaze. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. He could see Darren's face, the fear, the cracks in his tough mask, the man who wasn't so different from everyone else. Darren nodded. "I'm sure. I think maybe I need more too." Keanu gave a small smile, the kind that made even the harshest people feel safe. "All right," he said. "Then let's talk." When the cameras came back on, the audience was buzzing with energy. Word had spread online. Clips of Keanu's words were already everywhere. People were calling it the interview that made them cry, the one that reminded them that kindness still existed. Darren sat down, but this time his shoulders were not stiff. He looked smaller, human. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "Keanu, I want to ask you something different now, something real." Keanu nodded for him to go on. "What keeps you going?" Darren asked. "How do you keep showing kindness when the world keeps giving you reasons not to?" Keanu leaned forward, folding his hands. "Because I've seen what happens when you let the world harden you. I've seen friends lose themselves. I've seen people turn bitter, cold, alone. I don't want to live that way." He paused, looking into the audience, letting his words touch every quiet wound. Kindness is not something you do once. It's something you have to keep choosing, even when it hurts. Darren felt something break open in his chest. He thought about his father, a man who had once been gentle, but turned cruel when life didn't go his way. Darren had promised himself he'd never be like that, but here he was, hurting people, with questions just to feel powerful. What if it's too late?" Darren asked, his voice cracking. "What if you've already become the person you swore you wouldn't be?" The room went so quiet you could hear the soft whir of the cameras. Keanu's eyes softened. "It's never too late," he said. "The fact that you're asking means there's still light in you. Even a small candle can push back the dark." The audience began to clap, not out of pity, but because they knew what he said was true. Every person there had their own regrets, their own mistakes that felt too heavy to fix. But in that moment, they felt hope. A woman in the front row stood up. Her voice shook. "Keanu, what do you say to people who feel invisible, who feel like no one sees them?" Keanu turned to her, his smile gentle. "I see you," he said. "And you matter. You don't have to be loud to be important. Sometimes the quietest people carry the biggest hearts." The woman covered her mouth, tears slipping through her fingers. A stranger next to her reached out and held her hand. In that moment, they were no longer strangers. Darren wiped his eyes quickly, hoping the camera wouldn't catch it. But it did, and the world saw a man who had built his career on harsh words now breaking apart in front of millions. Keanu leaned closer to him, lowering his voice so only Darren could hear. "It's never too late to start over," he said. "Be kind to yourself first. The rest will follow." Darren nodded, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away this time. He let it stay, like a promise that things could be different. When the segment ended, the audience stood and clapped, not for the show, but for the moment they had just witnessed. They didn't see a superstar and a host anymore. They saw two men, raw and human, reminding everyone that strength isn't about power. It's about how softly you can hold another person's heart. As the lights dimmed, Keanu knew he had done more than answer questions. He had started something that would outlive the headlines. When the cameras went off for the final time that night, the studio did not empty quickly. People lingered in their seats, whispering to each other, wiping their eyes, some holding hands. With complete strangers, it was as if Keanu's words had made everyone remember that under all their noise and worries, they were just people wanting to be seen. Keanu stayed in his chair, talking to the people who came up to him. An old man with shaky hands told him he hadn't spoken to his son in 5 years, but tonight he would call him. A young mother said she would stop hiding her tears at work because she finally believed that being soft did not mean being weak. In the corner, Darren sat alone, shoulders hunched, head down. His producer hovered nearby, worried about the ratings. But Darren didn't care anymore about the numbers. He was replaying every sharp question he had asked Keanu. Every moment he had tried to twist kindness into weakness. And now, all he could feel was shame. Keanu noticed him. He excused himself from the small crowd around him and walked over. He didn't say anything right away. He just sat beside Darren, close enough that the anchor could feel his warmth. "I didn't mean for it to go like this," Darren whispered. I thought making you look small would make me look big." Keanu nodded, not judging him. "And now," Darren let out a shaky breath, "now I feel smaller than ever." Keanu looked around at the people who were still in the studio, hugging each other, sharing quiet smiles. "Sometimes we have to break before we open," he said. What you do next matters more than what you did before. Darren wiped his eyes. I don't know how to fix it. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. Start with one thing. Say sorry when you should. Listen when it's easier to speak. Help when no one's watching. Darren nodded. He felt like a boy again, learning how to be a man for the first time. Outside the studio, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread fast. People who had seen clips of the interview were waiting, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who made them believe that kindness could still win in a world that liked to laugh at it. Keanu stepped out into the cool night air. People cheered his name, but he lifted his hand gently, almost embarrassed. He never liked the noise. He moved through the small crowd, shaking hands, hugging an old woman who pressed a tiny bouquet of wildflowers into his hands. He took it like it was made of gold. A teenage boy stepped forward, his voice shaking. Keanu, do you really believe people like me can be kind too? Even when no one understands us? Keanu looked him in the eye. Especially people like you. The ones who feel misunderstood often carry the biggest hearts. Don't hide it. The boy nodded, biting his lip to hold back tears. His mother, standing behind him, mouthed a silent thank you. Keanu moved slowly, giving every person a moment. No bodyguards, no rush to leave. When someone handed him a marker to sign an old DVD, he wrote not just his name, but the words, "Stay kind when it's hardest." The man who received it held it to his chest like a treasure. Inside, Darren stood by the glass doors, watching. The producer came up beside him. You did good tonight, the producer said. No, Darren replied, his voice clearer than it had been in years. He did good tonight. I just got to watch it happen. The producer frowned. What are you gonna do now? People will want more interviews. They'll expect the old you, the one with the sharp tongue. Darren turned to face him. Then they'll be disappointed. I'm done tearing people apart. If they fire me for that, so be it. The producer stared at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. Maybe he had lost the angry, hollow mind he'd built for years. And maybe that was the best thing that could happen. Back outside, Keanu felt the night growing colder. The flowers in his hand were delicate and smelled like a memory he couldn't quite place. He looked up at the stars peeking through the city haze and wondered about all the people watching from their living rooms. The lonely ones, the broken ones, the people who still believed their softness was something to hide. He knew he couldn't fix everyone's pain. But maybe, just maybe, he had opened a small door inside them. A door that led to a place where kindness lived, quiet but unshakable. As he reached his car, an old beat-up sedan that looked out of place next to the shiny limos waiting for other guests, he turned to wave one last time. The people waved back, not at a celebrity, but at a man who had reminded them they didn't need permission to be good. And somewhere behind him, inside the studio, Darren sat down at his desk. He opened his old notebook, the one he hadn't used since he was a young reporter who still believed in telling stories that mattered. He wrote one word on the first page, begin. And as the night grew deeper, two men who had met under bright lights walked away in different directions, one back to his quiet home, one back to a life he finally had the courage to change. The days after the interview felt different. It was like something gentle had slipped through the cracks of the world, leaving tiny seeds of hope behind. Clips of Keanu's words spread everywhere. People didn't just watch them once, they replayed them when they needed courage, when they felt small, when they wanted to remember that being soft didn't mean being weak. A young teacher in a crowded city classroom played the clip for her students. They sat quiet, leaning forward, hearing Keanu's voice tell them it was okay to care, to listen, to help without asking for anything back. Later that day, one boy who always sat alone was surprised when the classmates sat beside him at lunch. No teasing, no whispers, just company. A father who hadn't spoken to his daughter in 10 years picked up the phone. His hand trembled as he dialed her number. When she answered, he couldn't find the right words, so he simply said, "I'm sorry, I want to try again." And on the other side of the line, she closed her eyes and let herself believe him. In a small town, an old man who had been angry at the world for decades turned off his TV and stepped outside for the first time in weeks. He saw his neighbor, A boy fixing his bicycle alone. The old man shuffled over, cleared his throat, and asked if he needed help. They worked side by side in silence, the sun warming their shoulders. To people who never knew they could still make a connection. As for Darren, he didn't return to the same show the next night. He sat at home with his notebook open, staring at the word begin. His wife peeked into his study and found him crying softly. He told her he didn't want to be the man who hurt people for a living anymore. He wanted to tell stories that healed, even if they didn't make him famous. Keanu stayed quiet after the show. He didn't post anything online. He didn't do another big interview. He simply went back to living the way he always did, helping quietly, listening deeply, being there when people least expected it. One morning, a few weeks later, he was sitting on that same park bench where the cruel questions had begun. A soft drizzle fell from a gray sky, but he didn't mind. He watched the world pass by, a mother rushing her child under an umbrella, a young couple laughing at the rain, a stray dog shaking water from its fur. A teenager spotted him from the bus stop. He walked over, shy at first. "Are you Keanu?" he asked. Keanu looked up and smiled. "I am." The boy shifted from foot to foot. "My dad. He watched you on TV. He was always so angry. He told me yesterday he wants to try being better. I just wanted to say thank you." Keanu's eyes softened. He patted the bench. "Sit with me," he said. "Tell me about him." So the boy sat. They talked about life, about fathers and sons, about how it's never too late to choose kindness. When the boy stood to leave, he felt lighter, like he was carrying a tiny piece of hope in his pocket. When the boy was gone, Keanu leaned back, letting the drizzle touch his face. He thought about how the world loved to tell people that being tough was everything, that money, power, and noise made you strong. But here he was, alone on a bench, his heart full, knowing that real strength was something quiet, something you gave away freely, something you protected, even when people laughed at it. A soft breeze blew through the park. The wildflowers someone had left on his doorstep days ago were tucked in his coat pocket, their petals still bright against the gray. He looked at the sky, the drops on his skin mixing with the warmth inside him. He knew the world wouldn't change overnight. There would always be people like Darren, people who needed to break others to feel big. But there would also be people who listened, people who remembered that one gentle voice could shake a nation awake. And maybe that was enough. As Keanu stood to leave, he turned to look at the empty bench, the place where a quiet man had shown the world that sometimes the softest words are the ones that echo the longest. He slipped his hands into his pockets, his steps slow and unhurried, disappearing down the path as the drizzle turned to a light, forgiving rain.